Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and today I would like to talk to you about Outward. As always, I will only use footage from the early to mid-game, so don't worry about me ruining any sort of surprise or potentially spoiling the story. As for Outward itself, it is an exploration-focused RPG that doesn't treat your character like they're anyone truly special. Instead, it just shows you the door to a wide-open world, gives you a pat on the back as you leave in search of treasure, and then simply laughs while you get devoured by a pack of hyenas. A ruthless experience to be sure, and one that many will not be able to stomach, but it is certainly a captivating one once you realize that all of the tools you need to survive are right there. You just need to figure out how to make the best use out of them. So if you're curious about what exactly Outward has to offer, as well as how it compares to the rest of the RPG genre, allow me to share my thoughts after a rather lengthy and rather eventful playthrough. While their gameplay styles and approaches to storytelling may differ, Outward is remarkably similar to games like Gothic, Risen, or even the more recent Elex. Much like them, Outward tries to include an absolutely staggering amount of features and systems, but due to either inexperience or a lack of budget, it ends up being a bit of a mess. An enjoyable mess, mind you, but a mess nonetheless. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Outward's survival aspects. In order to survive, you need to ensure that you have a steady supply of food and water in order to continue chugging along, get plenty of sleep so you don't collapse out of exhaustion in the middle of a battle, as well as keep a close eye on your temperature given that freezing or even overheating are real issues. This goes doubly so if you're a melee-focused character, given that you'll spend most of your time inside a portable oven, or plate armor as some people like to call it. There is a ton of systems here that all interact together to create a remarkably interesting survival experience, far deeper than one might expect from a simple RPG. However, despite all the complexity these systems might have, they are so deeply flawed that even a brand new player is likely to quickly realize just how trivial it all is. You can find food pretty much anywhere, so carrying travel rations is irrelevant. You can boil seawater and immediately get perfectly drinkable water. You can create an infinite amount of campfires to make cold weather a piece of cake, and the list goes on. No matter what sort of survival problem Outward puts in front of you, there will always be at least two different ways you can completely bypass it without spending any noticeable resources. A real shame too, since the core idea of trying to survive in an extremely hostile land is genuinely solid. It's just that Outward lacks the necessary polish to make it all work in unison. Thankfully, this sort of focus on depth and complexity fares much better in the other aspects of Outward, most notably in the crafting system. If you're willing to do a little bit of experimentation, or just collect a whole bunch of blueprints, you can use the crafting system to create pretty much anything. You can craft powerful armor, weapons that are far better than what you will find in the wilderness or even in stores, food that will keep you healthy and warm for ages, as well as potions that range from mildly helpful to hilariously overpowered. Given the amount of potent items you can craft, you might start thinking that Outward is a really easy game, which honestly would be your first and very last mistake. I've put in more than 200 hours into every single Dark Souls game, so I am no slouch when it comes to challenge, but Outward absolutely demolished me throughout the first dozen hours. It is absolutely relentless, and if you pick a fight you're not prepared for, you are going to get hammered straight into the ground. And that's exactly what happened to me, because I was too proud and way too stupid to admit defeat, and start quote-unquote cheating by using anything more than my trusty mace and shield combo. After all, I was a melee purist, so doing anything else was just out of the question. However, once I finally started experimenting with crafting traps, potions, stat buffing food, and poisons, I quickly realized that Outward has my favorite style of balance. It is completely and utterly unfair in both directions. There are some enemies that hit so hard you can pretty much get stun-locked to death, but you can also give them a taste of their own medicine by luring them into a trap and then pinning them to the floor over and over and over again. Is it a bit cheap to resort to such tactics? Absolutely, but I would be lying if I said it didn't also feel immensely satisfying to overcome all of the nonsense Outward is capable of doing to you. While there are dozens upon dozens of effects you can utilize during combat, the actual process of fighting enemies is remarkably simple. If we ignore magic for a second, all you can really do is single or combo attacks, roll around to avoid enemy blows, as well as block with your weapon or shield. Things do get a bit more complex once you consider how limited your stamina bar is, but outside of that, melee combat is a fairly straightforward affair. Once again, however, simple does not mean easy. Pretty much every single enemy, from the very beginning to the very end, deals a large amount of damage, has a hefty amount of stamina you will need to burn through, and, unfortunately for you, usually has friends that will jump in and try to help them. Combine this with the somewhat janky animations and controls that will occasionally fight you for dominance, and you've got a combat system that will likely take you quite a few hours to get comfortable with, and even then you'll probably find yourself dying just because you made a mistake or two. Whether all of this makes the melee combat good or bad, that is a difficult question to answer. I've had moments where I died in such stupid and unfair ways that I just rage quit out of frustration. Though I've also had periods where I've expertly navigated through ghost-riddled ruins and escaped almost completely unscarred, which as you might imagine, felt pretty damn good. So while there were moments where I felt like my failures were the result of some sort of bug or just the game being a bit of a mess, I can't help but admit that I've got a bit of a soft spot for Outward's combat. It may be janky, but it is one of the rare few combat systems where every single item serves an actual purpose, and for me, that sort of thing matters a lot. When it comes to magic, I am no expert as I've only really used some of the introductory spells, but the concept itself is rather intriguing. Before you even begin your career as a spellslinger, you will first need to climb a giant mountain and delve through its monster-infested tunnels in order to bind yourself to a magical ley line. Not only is the process of reaching the ley line a rather challenging one, but if you want to be able to actually cast spells, you will need to permanently sacrifice both your health and stamina in order to expand your mana reserves. Being a mage in Outworld really isn't an easy task, and it doesn't get any easier from here. Most of the spells you get early on are comically weak on their own, but they do become monstrously powerful when combined in very specific ways. As such, you will need to do a bit of research in order to figure out what to do, as well as collect a whole bunch of magical reagents that are required to cast some of the stronger spells. Additionally, you will need a ton of mana to make use of all these spells, so do be prepared to carry an entire pantry of mana-increasing food and potions wherever you go. While this might sound tedious to the extreme, it is actually a pretty nice system since the reward is comparable to the effort required. You'll need to spend a large amount of time getting ready to actually cast any spells, but once you've done the initial legwork, you'll be able to blast through pretty much any encounter with ease. Doing so costs a considerable amount of reagents, so I never relied on magic too heavily, but honestly, it was really nice to have a couple of high-powered spells in my back pocket as a reserve. Speaking of pockets, the inventory system is one of the most unique and flavorful aspects of Outward. Instead of simply stuffing entire broadswords down your pants, most of the stuff you loot will go straight into your oversized backpack. As you would expect, the more you loot, the heavier the backpack will be, until eventually it starts slowing you down due to its sheer weight. Since this isn't exactly ideal during combat, Outward allows you to simply chuck your backpack to the floor at a moment's notice, thus, much like Lydia, freeing you from all your burdens and allowing you to fight at full speed. This is an incredibly small feature in the grand scheme of things, but as someone that loves collecting tons of loot, it is one that has significantly improved my overall experience. That said, you still don't want to loot everything in Outward, as there are only a couple of vendors in each map, while most of the valuable items also tend to be a bit on the heavy side of things. So if you're like me, this might annoy you at the very beginning, since leaving items behind just always feels terrible. But given that Outward's item pricing is rather sensible, it is much better to go for a couple of quality items over an entire pile of garbage. After all, what would a town merchant rather buy? 2 quality iron shields, or a couple of spears made out of smelly mushrooms? Another reason you might want to avoid looting all the things is the surprisingly lengthy distance between landmarks. Running from one side of the map to another might take you 5 to 10 minutes, so unless you really have to, you are better off just exploring the nearby wilderness instead of returning to town. While this is certainly a bit brutal, I'm actually a fan of this sort of world design, as it promotes the idea of careful planning, as well as raises the stakes by having you slowly run out of resources while out in hostile territory. This is also why I find the survival mechanics so disappointing, because if there weren't easy answers to all of your needs, travel could have been a cool little minigame rather than just a waste of time. When it comes to the locations themselves, Outward is once again a bit of a mixed bag. Some are nothing more than pointless filler, just a couple of generic ruins with nothing of any real interest within them. On the other hand, there are also landmarks that are absolutely massive in size, as well as filled to the brim with danger, interesting stories, and, more importantly, loot. One of my favorite examples of this is a tower that tries to trick you by offering a treasure chest at the very entrance, all the while hiding an entire dungeon behind a secret door. It is fairly obvious from the beginning that something is not exactly right with this tower, but it's up to you and your deduction skills to figure out what's actually happening. And that is the sort of exploration-based gameplay that I love to see. The problem is that you're never really sure what you're going to find, so in order to get the full Outward experience, you're pretty much going to have to explore the whole map. Given the large map size and the somewhat slow movement speed, this will likely take you a very long time. Personally, I didn't mind spending over 40 hours completing Outward, but I do feel it's worth mentioning that if you decide to undertake this journey, it is going to be one that will take a great deal of time, a great deal of effort, and a great deal of resolve to see through to the end. As for the story itself, it is pretty much the worst aspect of Outward and barely worth a mention. While the overall lore seems to be interesting, the stuff you can participate in is pretty much all just generic RPG quests. Things do get a little bit more intriguing towards the end, but between the terrible voice acting and the low amounts of story-focused quests, I slowly found myself just not caring about any of it. I was just there to explore the world and see what sort of mysteries I can uncover. Much like the story, the visuals are somewhat basic. Outward has a rather pleasant art style that combines elements from numerous cultures, especially when it comes to the main factions, but the actual graphical fidelity is an entire generation in the past. I still wouldn't call Outward ugly, as there really is a certain charm to its visuals, but you can definitely see its mid-budget indie origins throughout the entire journey. The last, and definitely not least, is the music. Unlike the visuals and story, which both have their own share of problems, the music in Outward is actually phenomenal. It's hard to describe through words alone, but it feels like the music was specifically designed to be listened to while taking a long walk. It's often upbeat and cheery, though it can also descend into a more atmospheric and foreboding variant if you ever find yourself in a particularly dangerous location. So, while Outward may be flawed in numerous ways, the soundtrack is thankfully not one of them. Outward is not a game for everyone. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that Outward is an incredibly niche RPG. It has an immense difficulty curve, there are minor and major issues pretty much everywhere, you'll need a great deal of patience and stubbornness in order to succeed, while doing just about anything takes a decent amount of time as the world really is just absolutely massive. However, if you enjoy a challenge and none of the stuff I just said actually scares you, Outward might be worth a closer look, as it really does deliver on the idea of exploring an unknown and ruthless world with nothing but your wits to aid you. After all, the greater the challenge, the better it feels when you finally overcome it. That said, I would still recommend waiting a little while before potentially grabbing Outward, given that the €40 price tag is a bit too spicy when it comes to my tastes. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. If you would like to see more videos like this, I would welcome you to subscribe, hit the stupid bell, pet your dog, and stuff like that. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have fun. See ya!